With Human complete, the next album by the band Death was supposed to be a culmination of 4 albums previous of work, of assembling a metal puzzle, a puzzle that transcended time, space, genre, and classification all as a whole. In order to make such an album that blended both progression along with death as well as thrash, well, Chuck needed to assemble a lineup of musicians that were extremely capable in this department around him to really replicate and cause the ideas that were flowing to be articulated and represented the correct way. That way this album could be seen. Individual Thought Patterns was this record, and he was able to get all-star musicians for this already to go along with his already fantastic core. Andy LaRocque was borrowed from King Diamond, and of course the journeyman himself, Gene Hoglan, was on this particular record, as he was on the Symbolic record. Individual Thought Patterns is exactly what it's supposed to be. Human was the album that sort of interlaced and introduced the idea of this gigantic metal puzzle that was going to be assembled and put together and finally seen. The 3 albums prior to Human, of course, saw little inklings of each and every individual aspect that the Individual Thought Patterns and Human both were able to really explore and produce for a listener. Human was able to get this whole thing kind of pieced together in a rough sense to the point where it was almost perfect. It needed to have a little bit of oil on the cogs, all the hinges kind of needed to be perfected, and the whole thing, the whole metal machine seemed to be in perfect working order. However, it wasn't yet a mammoth, it was not yet an unstoppable giant. With Individual Thought Patterns, the unstoppable giant awakened from its tempered sleep. And Individual Thought Patterns did not fail. It is one of those albums that is widely considered to be one of the best extreme metal albums of all time. It's considered to be one of the most highly controversial albums of all time, considering it has such a diverse element to it, that it has such a diverse quantity of different genres laced within one particular record, that even reviewers back whenever this album was released were kind of unsure whether or not to really consider it to be a death album, like a death metal album, it's obviously a death album, or whether it was more of a thrash album, or if they needed to start combining genres together in order to create one new genre of, well, genres. Sounds weird, but it's pretty much the truth. Whenever you really spoil it down, whenever you really take it back to brass tacks, to the base level, what you have here is a culmination of years of hard work, and a culmination of styles that only came together to really show the capabilities of each individual member of this lineup. Individual Thought Patterns was not a record such as Symbolic or The Sound of Perseverance, where lengthy affairs were needed in order to really illustrate the points that were attempted to be conveyed. Instead, they were able to use shorter compositions and just a landmark intensity and a landmark brutality, almost bulldozing over you, as I mentioned on the Human disc, leaving you just in this puddle, staring back up like, whoa, the fuck just hit me? I want to do it again. But of course, Individual Thought Patterns would probably be best well known for the Philosopher music video and the song The Philosopher, which of course ended up on MTV's Beavis and Butthead, where it was watched by the group of preteens, or teens, whatever you want to call them. I mean, personally, they're just animated characters that made me laugh my ass off. They were criticized. Chuck's vocals were mocked in a future episode whenever they were trying to order tacos. So obviously, even though there was a little bit of mockery there was still a sublime respect, really, for the body of work that the band has really had been output, not to mention with what they did with Individual Thought Patterns. This is an album that's chock full of classics, such as Overactive Imagination, Trapped in a Corner, Nothing is Everything. There's a lot of great tracks that you're going to find on this record that really will suit your metal palate, while at the same time really helping you understand just how an album like this has such lasting power within the metal community. This is an album that people clamor for. I've worked in a music store now for nearly 2 years, and I've had many people ask me, where are the copies of the Back Death catalog? Why is there only The Sound of Perseverance and a limited supply of the others available, typically only whenever they're used? And I have to explain to them that each of them are going to be remastered. So the original The original versions, the very first version 1.0s, I guess, that we had in stock before, will probably never be seen again, and are now going to be sought-out collector's items. However, it still doesn't quench the thirst. They need this particular music, and I really think that more people need these records. More people really need to experience death as a whole, especially those who kind of take a look at metal and look at it as sort of a very monochrome genre. Those that really don't like to look outside the box, glance outside the window, and see the other sides of the world that kind of surround them. Instead, they only see metal as a very monochrome and a very one-off kind of affair, where it's just a bunch of guys playing guitars, singing about Satan. With albums such as Death's whole discography, but especially beginning with Individual Thought Patterns, you really get to see that it's definitely a lot more than that. Other topics are tackled that are perhaps even more along the lines of mainstream or even very, very abstract philosophy, as opposed to just the typical Satan worship. And Death is one of the bands that have always really been on the grounds of exploring these particular topics. It's something that was very important to Chuck, it was something that was very important to the band, and it's something that made them all the more enigmatic, and by that standard, all the more impressive. The music itself was impressive as, just by itself. However, whenever you take a glance at the lyrics, whenever you take a listen to everything, to the finished product, it becomes spellbinding. Individual Thought Patterns is, in my opinion, part 2 of a 4-part album series that is nearly untouchable in the 1990s that were output by the band Death. Chuck and the boys were able to put out 4 phenomenal records, each of which could easily be considered a 9.0 or above, and rapidly could be going towards that territory of the most perfect metal album ever created. Now, while that is definitely reserved for another album that I may cover on a later date, these are damn close. Not to mention, for the death metal genre at least, these are easily 4 of the greatest albums that were ever created. Individual Thought Patterns was kind of part 2 of this shortened affair, where the brutality and the speed, the lightning fast speed, was really at the showcase. With the latter 2 albums, the 2 albums that we're about to talk to in the next 2 videos, it's a lot of 2s, I know, we're going to see what happens whenever Death decides to explore the realm of lengthier composition, where they decide to take things in an even more progressive direction. We're going to see what exactly helped craft Symbolic and the Sound of Perseverance. Cover Killer Nation, of course, with you as always to say that if you have not heard the band Death, if this is your first experience, if this album review is the first time you've heard of the band Death because you're relatively new to the metal marketplace, strap in. You got a long ride ahead of you, but I'll be your guide.